All right, it's 5 after now, so why don't we get started? If people roll in, that's okay. Um, so this presentation and workshop is called Feelings 101. We'll be talking about, emotional literacy today, understanding emotions. I'll get into exactly what we're going to be covering in a minute. But just recognizing feelings are hard, emotions are difficult, and it's something worth kind of exploring and talking about today. With that, I just want to introduce myself. So my name is Mitch. I'm a therapist with ShiftCollab and Real Campus. I help people navigate their mental health. I often work with students to kind of deal with understanding difficult emotions, working through stressful times. You are all dealing with a lot of substantial challenges right now. As students, you have a lot of stress as it is. With the pandemic, there's that kind of heightened stress as well. So it's a really great to be able to kind of understand and explore some of the difficult emotions that you might be experiencing, understanding, why you're having them, where they're coming from, and how to manage them as well. So with that, again, feelings are very hard. They're hard to kind of understand. I've had a lot of clients tell me, I wish could just be void of emotions. Obviously, we don't want that. Feelings do serve a purpose, even though that they're hard. They're very valuable. And also, you want to have, feelings aren't always difficult. They're also more acceptable when there are things like joy, happiness, etc. So, we experience a range of emotions, and it's good to recognize that although feelings are hard, they're necessary, they're important, and they're valid, even if they kind of make us have irrational thoughts at times, or perhaps cause us to be a bit more reactive in our behaviors. So, some of the things that we'll be covering today, uh, emotions, why we have them. So, again, understanding where they're coming from, what the purpose is, the relationship and connection between our emotions, thoughts, and behavior. They're all very much interconnected, and it's good to understand, this relationship between the two, between the three. Sorry. I'll teach you a few coping tools, and as well, we'll explore some of the supports available for you, in case you need some additional support to kind of navigate your emotions, to better understand them, and to better meet the needs that are perhaps not being met. So, what emotions are you feeling right now? So, anybody who's willing, write it in the chat box. Again, we're always feeling emotions, whether they're strong emotions or not. Perhaps you're feeling neutral. Perhaps you're feeling melancholic. It's good to understand and recognize that we're emotions. We're feeling them all day. Sometimes we're feeling more emotion, one emotion more than the other. Two emotions at the same time. Three emotions at the same time. So think about what you're feeling right now, and if you'd like, put it into the chat box below. So for myself, the way that I'm feeling right now, I'm excited to be hosting this workshop. Obviously a little bit anxious and eager to be talking to all of you, and mostly just feeling excited about this. Is anybody willing to share how they're feeling in the chat box? If not, that's okay. Just feel to put it in, and I can say what I see. Okay. So again, it's really important to understand the current context that we're living in right now and how that might be impacting our emotions. So COVID-19 is causing a lot of confusing and difficult feelings. So this is happening because there's an uncertainty of the future of the pandemic, disruption of your school, coping with social distancing, which is really difficult and nuanced at times. Um, I think everybody has a kind of their own understanding of what's most safe, and it's kind of nuanced and complicated at times. And I think that can create its own kind of stressful feelings, um, and emotional disturbance at times. Perhaps you're worrying about your friends and yourself. There's job precarity right now, which is causing a lot of stress and anxiety, and then a lot of grief and loss as well. Either the grief of someone passing, or just a more symbolic loss of not reaching certain milestones such as graduation, or not having certain opportunities to see friends, some of these typical things that you do as a student. So we're experiencing a lot of different emotions right now. So again, as students, you're already experiencing a lot of kind of stress and anxiety as it is. But all these things are kind of heightened or exacerbated by the current conditions as well. The current context certainly plays an important role. So it's important that we're able to kind of pay attention to that as well and acknowledge how the current context might be impacting our emotions. So as I said, part of today's workshop is going to be understanding, why we have emotions. So with that, emotions have three jobs, major jobs. So emotions have a lot of other roles as well, but the major roles that emotions have are communication. They motivate us, and they provide us some kind of validation. So with communications, emotions tell others what we're experiencing. So the way that we express ourselves, the way that we kind of react to things, that tells others how we're understanding that experience. So, if someone tells you that you aren't good at what you're doing, I'm sure that you're going to express some kind of disappointment, anxiety, frustration, anger. It tells them that you're feeling an emotional response to that for whatever reason, and probably for a good reason. Um, and another job that emotions have is motivation. So emotions can act and help us kind of pay attention to focus, the kind of fight or flight. So again, they kind of push us to kind of react to things. And at times, this reaction isn't the most healthy thing. This is why it's really important to be able to be very mindful of your emotional response, because if you're angry, you might feel motivated to punch a hole in the wall, and that's not going to be the most healthy way to deal with that. At the same time, emotions such as stress or anxiety, they might also motivate us, to get an assignment done, to study for a test, or perhaps if you're an athlete, that kind of stress can also cause you to perform. But you want to be able to make sure that the emotions that you're experiencing are manageable, that you're understanding, why you're having them, and you can use that understanding to better, regulate your emotions. So again, it's good that emotions kind of motivate us, but we want to be mindful of how they're motivating us as well. And then in addition, emotions kind of provide us some validation. So it gives us information about the situation around us and what we need. And this is really, really important. So when you're able to engage with your emotional experience, identify what you're feeling, it might really give you some good indication of what your needs are. If you have unmet needs, how you need to kind of respond to that. So again, I think oftentimes people want to dismiss their emotions because they're either difficult or they're causing them to be reactive, and behave or think in irrational or unhealthy ways. But we need to give validation to our emotions because they are there for a reason, right? They're giving us some indication about the current situation. And maybe it's to tell us that, what we're feeling, the thoughts that we're having in response to something, they are irrational. But that feeling that undercuts that thought, it's very much valid and we're having it for a reason. So we want to understand, why we're having that feeling. So when understanding emotions, it's good to understand that we have 8 basic emotions. And we have, our emotions encompass much more, and we'll explore that as well in terms of the wide range of emotions. But in terms of the 8 basic emotions, they can be described as anger, fear, anticipation, surprise, joy, sadness, trust, disgust. So things that we experience likely, on a day-to-day basis of some capacity. I think a lot of people, when they think of emotions, they think of things like anger or sadness or even kind of stress or anxiety. And you can understand how a lot of these emotions would fit into those things, and that you can experience one emotion with another too. You can have anger, you can also have fear, you can have sadness, you can also have joy. These we have conflicting emotions at times, which makes our emotional experience much more difficult. And again, which makes people want to just kind of push them under the rug, or try to distract themselves from them. So here's a little visualization in terms of the emotions that we might experience, and the purpose for each of them too. And the purpose isn't exclusive to these, but just a general sentiment that usually accompanies these kinds of emotions. So anger oftentimes is the fight against problems. It's causing you to be defensive about something. Maybe there's an insecurity that you need to kind of combat or challenge. Fear, they're trying to protect us from danger. So we're kind of sensing or interpreting that there's imminent danger of some kind. There's some kind of risk, and we need to kind of have this defense mechanism, this feeling of fear, to be able to tell our brains and to tell our behaviors, to respond to that appropriately. Another feeling is that anticipation, looking forward and planning. So this can be very exciting. It gives you feelings of hope and optimism. Surprise, the purpose of that, to focus on new situations. Maybe something that we're not anticipating, but we're shifting our attention to focus on these new situations. Joy, the purpose of that is to remind us of what's important. So oftentimes when we're able to kind of have that peace of mind, able to be perceptive, what actually fulfills us and satisfies us in life, that gives us that feeling of joy. Sadness can be, to connect us with those that we love. So the way that you express sadness, oftentimes you do so in a way to communicate to those that you need them in some capacity, that you need to be heard, that you need to be, supported in some way. So again, it's a difficult emotion to have at times, so it's important to be able to understand why we're having it, and important to be able to express it as well. So with trust, often it's used to connect with people, to help, and you need to build that kind of connection over time. Again, another great emotion to have. It reinforces those social bonds that we've created, and reinforces the ability that we're not the thought that we're not alone as well. We're not living in isolation. We're able to trust others, and that's a really important part of our ability to function in society. is that ability to lean on others, to rely on others, to be able to cooperate. And in order to have that, you need that kind of trust. It's good to be able to recognize that feeling. And then in addition to that, disgust as well. So that might be, rejecting what is unhealthy. So when you feel that disgust, it's likely in response to something that's not working for you, something that's really wrong for you. And so it's really good to be able to recognize that as well. Um, so you can feel two things at once. Again, as I mentioned, emotions aren't unique. They're not in isolation. They're not siloed. Um, so you can feel hope and fear at the same time. You can be proud and anxious. You can be joy. You can be lonely. You can have anger. You can have curiosity. So this is another complicated thing when it comes to emotions. Is that we have often combating or conflicting emotions at times, and that's what makes it very, very hard to kind of pinpoint and to kind of engage with our emotional experience and to navigate them if we're kind of experiencing some conflicting feelings within our emotions. And I want you to just think about that for a second in terms of experiences where you felt very emotionally confused. It's been difficult to navigate your emotions. Why is that? Is it because you've been experiencing more than one feeling at once? Is it because you're experiencing something and maybe having an irrational thought, but at the same time you're able to have that logical thought to contradict it? There's a lot of reasons why emotions are hard to navigate, and one of the biggest ones is because we're experiencing more than one thing at once, and that can be really hard in itself. So as I mentioned, there's a real connection between our emotions, our thoughts, and our behaviors. And as this, diagram represents, they're all kind of speaking to each other as well. Our behaviors impact our thoughts impact our behaviors, our emotions and feelings impact behaviors and thoughts, that direction goes both ways as well. So again, thinking about it in terms of, anxiety, if I'm feeling insecure about something, that's going to likely have, create some irrational thoughts. And maybe based on that, I'm going to behave in a way that's not in my best interest because I'm reacting against those insecurities. On the other hand, maybe you're feeling a lot of joy right now, and that's making you feel, it's making you have really great thoughts about life, to think, life is great right now, and that's going to cause you to behave in a way that's, very meaningful for you, in a way that expresses to others that life is good right now. So again, it's good to understand our emotion, thought, behavior connection. Um, and really with this as well is to be able to identify what's most accessible for you. So if it's harder for you to identify what your emotions are, perhaps it's easier to identify those thoughts that are a result of those emotions. So again, if it's for you to recognize anxiety, then maybe think about those insecure thoughts that you have. To think, I have really low self-esteem right now, or I feel, less desirable as a person right now. Why is that? Is that coming from a feeling? Is that feeling, insecurity? Why am I having that feeling? So, making this connection can provide us some really valuable insights. So again, keep that in mind going forward, is that our emotions, thoughts, and behaviors are all very much interconnected. And if you're finding it hard to understand, why you're thinking or behaving in a certain way, try to reflect on your emotions. If you're finding it hard to identify what you're feeling, try and reflect on your thoughts and behaviors and think about how they're kind of being connected in that moment. So let's think about emotions and how they might show up. So again, they're going to show up differently for everybody. Some people are going to experience, just the emotional feeling first. Some others are going to feel physical feelings, or others are just going to behave in response to their emotions. So again, whatever is most identifiable for you is going to be what's accessible for you to kind of focus on going forward. So some people will be able to, experience your emotions as that feeling, these feelings of, anxiety, sadness, depression, restlessness, lack of motivation, all signs that you're really experiencing and feeling something. Others might experience their emotions, the physical side effects of it. I know if I've had a really stressful day, I'll usually end up having a headache by the end of the day. That tells me I've had stress, my blood pressure has been raised. You might also feel fatigued if you've been dealing with a lot of sadness, an upset stomach, maybe if you're feeling really anxious or angry, sweating, pounding heart rate if you're feeling angry or anxious, insomnia if you're feeling, emotionally disturbed in some kind of way. And then again, others, they might not have those physical experiences, or they might not be conscious of their emotions they're feeling, but they might react to it. And that comes across as in terms of behaviors. So things like isolation, social withdrawing, procrastination, overeating, undereating, using substance use to kind of cope with these difficult emotions, angry outbursts, they're kind of just reacting on it again, avoidance or decreased exercise. So they lack that kind of motivation. And then again, as you can see, all these things are going to really relate to each other. Um, so, if you have an angry outburst, that's likely going to cause you to have a headache or to have a pounding heart rate. And that's likely caused by some kind of irritability or increased anger. So, again, understanding that these are all connected, but the way that you experience your emotions is, it might be salient in one way more than the other. So, it's also good to be able to kind of understand that. So it's good to kind of make this distinction between our thoughts and our feelings. So again, our feelings can often create thoughts, and also our thoughts also can impact our feelings. So I often like to talk to clients about this in terms of, again, if you're feeling insecure or anxious, what's the kind of thought, what's the kind of narrative that you're having about yourself that time? So if someone said something to you that, provoked this feeling of insecurity, you're likely to have thoughts that are going to be, down on your self-esteem, that are going to be lowering your confidence. Things like, I'm not worthy, or I'm not desirable as a person, or I'm not capable of these things. And then think about how these thoughts are also going to play back into that feedback loop to then exacerbate and heighten those emotions as well. How your thoughts also impacting your emotions, and how your emotions also impacting your thoughts. So as I mentioned, we're going to be talking about 5 tools to help us cope with our feelings. The first is to be able to kind of identify the exact feeling. Again, we've identified that there's 8 kind of primary emotions, but underneath that, as you can see based on this mood wheel, there's a lot that kind of stem out from that. And this is something that I find very difficult with a lot of folks that I'm working with, is that they say, I'm just feeling stressed. And I say, well, what else are you feeling underneath that stress? And it's really hard for them to kind of identify what else they might be feeling. Or as this chart suggests, maybe they just said, I feel bad right now. I can't pinpoint what I'm feeling. So familiarizing yourself with these, a wide range of emotions, how they might fall into certain categories of these more general primary emotions is going to be very helpful for you to better and more accurately identify what you're feeling. So just take a second to take a look at this. Take a look at, again, think about how you're feeling right now. And if you feel like you're just feeling, whatever, happy, what's associated with that? Like, are you feeling optimistic? Are you feeling content, interested, powerful? If you're feeling bad, what does that mean to you? Is it because you're feeling tired or bored, maybe? Are you sleepy? Are you unfocused? Again, are you feeling more emotion, one more, 2 emotions at the same time? Are you feeling happy? Are you feeling bad at the same time? That's certainly possible. You could be happy to be in this workshop right now, but anxious about schoolwork, or you could be, regretting that you showed up to this workshop today and feeling surprised at how horrible it is, but excited to know that it's going to be ending soon. So, thinking about how these emotions might be happening at the same time, and also just confronting the fact that our emotions are very complex, and that they're not just, you can't just reduce them down to 1 or 2 feelings of good or bad, or even these 8 feelings of, happy, sad, disgusted, angry, fearful, bad, or surprised. There's a lot of emotions that kind of go into that. So just take a second to take a look at that. So the next tool is to be able to kind of have a scale for your emotions. So you want to check in on your feelings using a scale of 1 to 10. And this can be really helpful for you throughout the day. And it also will provide you indicators in terms of, what's working for you, what's perhaps a trigger for you as well. So, if you're able to start the day and say, my anxiety is at a level 2 right now, but then by the end of the day, you're at a 7 or an 8, what happened in between that time? To be able to kind of put your feelings and emotions on a scale, it really provides, again, that additional insight and indication of what's working for you, what's not working for you, what needs are maybe not being unmet. So again, this can be applied to anxiety, sadness, anger, disgust, all those emotions that we've been talking about. And it just kind of reinforces you and holds you accountable to take stock of your emotional experience. And that's something that we don't often do. We often want to kind of just distract ourselves from them, especially if they are more difficult emotions or feelings. So, try and take stock of your emotions on a more day-to-day basis. Use a scale to think about how you're feeling, and use that scale to be able to indicate, what's working for you and what's not. Again, if you're having an argument with somebody and you feel that your 10 is a 10 out of 10, your anger is a 10 out of 10, then, take a step back from that. Obviously, you need some space. You need to digest. You need to understand, why you're feeling angry in that moment. If your happiness is at a 1 out of 10, why is it? Why is your happiness so low? What can you do to bring that number up a little bit? So again, taking stock in terms of where your emotions fall on the scale will tell you what you need to do to help, meet those emotions, to meet the needs that these emotions are expressing. Again, reinforcing this idea that emotions are very valuable and they do tell us something meaningful. So we need to listen to them. And one way to listen to them is to be aware by using these kinds of scales. So I encourage you again to just try and take stock of that. The third tool that I want to introduce you to um, is this kind of stress action worksheet. So you can take action when you feel stress or a difficult emotion comes up. So let's talk about this for a minute in terms of how you might be able to use this. So you want to be able to identify what the stressor is. Again, use a scale of 1 to 10 to rate your emotions. And then think about the action. So think about, are you able to avoid, alter, accept, or adapt? And I'll explain that in a little bit more detail in the next slide. But again, just kind of labeling something like um, working on an assignment is causing me to have stress on a 9 out of 10. What action can I take to help mitigate that stressor? Um, or perhaps talking to my friend is really causing me stress. Or perhaps, if I meditate, then that's, a 0 out of 10 stressor. So again, taking kind of inventory and then relating that to some meaningful action. And again, let's take a little bit deeper look in terms of what actions are required to be able to meet these stressors. So the first one is avoid. And this is kind of pushing us to focus on what you can control and to say no to the rest. This is kind of going back to this concept of radical acceptance, which is a really common and very useful tool that comes from the therapy modality dialectical behavioral therapy, rooted in those Eastern traditions of meditation, mindfulness, Buddhism, to kind of say we have to accept that there's going to be some kind of suffering in our life. We could accept that and then take responsibility and accountability for how we can respond to that. So again, focusing on what you can control, and if you can't control somebody, then let go of that. And certainly this is easier said than done. But the more that you're able to be aware of this, the more that you'll be able to be conscious and cognizant of that, the easier it's going to become for you. So really trying to be mindful of this. So again, avoiding what you can't control, focusing on what you can control. That's going to give you that feeling of empowerment. It's going to give you some feeling of autonomy and self-determination, even when you're feeling very stressed. And this is a really great tool to use when you're starting to feel anxious or panicked. Another action that you can use is to alter. So change what you can about the stressor. So again, if you're feeling really stressed about having to work towards, um, studying for a test, and the test is coming up in 1 week, then try to study as much as you can. Try to gather the material that you need. Try to make the demands a little bit, a little more manageable with the resources that you have. So when you alter, think about what resources and tools you have at your disposal, and think about how you can use them to meet the demands that are causing this kind of stressor, that are causing this difficult emotion. Perhaps this is also about the way that you think, and we'll be talking about this in terms of accepting and adapting as well. But again, in terms of changing about what you can with the stressor, maybe that's you, maybe that's something, an external factor as well. Consider the conditions that are creating the stressor, what's contributing to that. um, and with that understanding and insight, try to change what you can to minimize the weight and the demand of the stressor. So the next action is to accept. So you can accept the things the way that they are. Part of this is going back to this concept of radical acceptance as well. Not worrying about what you can't control, focusing on what you can control. Um, and a lot of times, we really attach ourselves to our expectations, and that's going to cause us a lot of disappointment or suffering when those expectations are not met. And I'm certainly not saying that we should abandon all of our expectations, but we should, continually kind of engage and evaluate with the expectations that we create for ourselves or for others or for the world around us. Examine whether or not they're realistic, or if they're fair to us, if they're fair to others. And if you can answer yes to those questions, if they're fair, if they're realistic, I still want you to loosen your grip a little bit on those expectations as well. To accept that things might not likely happen the way that they go. I often tell people the only thing that we can expect is the unexpected. And with that, we should inform our expectations with that sentiment to say, again, it's okay to have expectations, but being wary and mindful of that, are these expectations might not be met because things happen, and that's okay. So that's part of that acceptance as well, as understanding that things might not go your way, they might not be ideal. That's okay. The more that we can be aware of that and accept that, the less our emotions are going to be heightened and difficult to manage. And then the last action is to adapt. So again, going back to this kind of understanding of expectations, and more importantly, reframing your thinking. So what's the way that you're thinking about this current stressor right now? How are you thinking about this emotion? Is the way that you're thinking about this emotion heightening what you're feeling right now? And this is often the case. As we talked about, this relationship between our thoughts and our feelings, it's very much, a bi-directional kind of relationship where our thoughts are impacting our emotions are impacting our thoughts. So I want you to take a step back when you're facing a difficult emotion and think about, what's my current thought process right now? Is the way that I'm thinking heightening this difficult emotion? If so, can I take a step outside that, or step beside it even, to think about things differently? And this is a really useful opportunity, especially when you're in conflict with another person, when you're arguing, when you're having misunderstanding. If you're feeling really angry about somebody, with somebody, kind of ask yourself, take that step back to say, why is it that I'm feeling this angry with them? Can I understand where they're coming from? Can I take a step outside the way that I'm thinking right now to try and offer empathy, compassion, to broaden my perspective of the current situation? So again, try to reframe that thinking. Try to identify unhelpful thinking styles as well. When we're feeling emotional, we tend to, default into these unhelpful thinking styles, such as, all or nothing thinking, that kind of black and white way of thinking about things, or catastrophizing things as well, is a very common kind of unhelpful thinking style that we fall into. So again, being able to label what your stressor is, understanding the weight of it, and then thinking about what action is required is a really valuable process. And what's instrumental in this process is taking and having the capacity to take the time to take a step back, to be able to kind of afford yourself the opportunity to pay attention to your current emotional experience, to engage in it. And then by using these four, tools of avoiding, altering, accepting, adapting, you're bringing in a little bit of a logic to kind of work with something that might be a little bit more illogical or irrational. Again, our emotions often kind of cause a irrational response in our thoughts or behavior, but that doesn't mean that our emotions aren't valid. So it's really valuable to recognize, to validate and confront your emotions, but also use these tools to help kind of provide some logic understanding, to give you a bit of clarity and how you to best respond to it, and to better understand, why you're experiencing it. So as I mentioned, unhelpful thinking styles and habits are often a response to our emotions. And this is something that we need to be cognizant of, we need to watch out for. So as I mentioned, all or nothing thinking, sometimes called black and white thinking, is a really common example. An example of this is, if I'm not perfect, then I'm a total failure. Thinking these two things are mutually exclusive, it's not fair. We're ignoring the nuance, but that's a thing when it comes to emotions. Again, when we have these heightened, especially difficult emotions, it reduces our capacity to consider the nuance, to consider the complexity of human relations, the complexity of our world in general. When we're angry or we're anxious, we think of things more in a black and white, more of an all or nothing way. And it's good to be mindful of that, because again, that thinking is going to impact our emotions as well. Another unhelpful thinking style is using a mental filter, only paying attention to certain types of evidence. So, I only focus on my failures and not my successes. And this is a really common um, problem when people have insecurities. Someone can tell them they love them 100 times, and it only takes them one time to say, I hate you, for that to really stick with them. And they're using that mental filter to focus on, well, that person hates me because I said that, ignoring the fact and the evidence that they said I love you 100 other times. But again, that hate really resonates with them emotionally. It provokes them in a feeling of rejection or insecurity, and that's going to stick with them, and that's going to cause them to have an unhelpful thinking style of using that mental filter. So again, being very aware of this is going to be helpful. That's the best way to combat these unhelpful thinking styles, is to bring that kind of consciousness and awareness into how you're doing this. Another unhelpful thinking style is jumping to conclusions. So again, imagining we know what others are thinking and trying to predict the future. You're making assumptions. Again, when we make assumptions, it's never fair. An example of this, I know exactly what to think about me. Or another one example is, I know we'll fail. And it's very similar to that all or nothing thinking as well, or that catastrophizing that we're going to talk about in a second as well. Looking through these unhelpful thinking styles, they all kind of play into each other. They're all, again, very unhelpful in the way that we understand the world. It ignores the nuance of situations. Again, when you make these assumptions, you're ignoring the other evidence. You're ignoring any of the other possibilities that could be there. And likely you're ignoring it because you're feeling that heightened emotion. One other unhelpful thinking style is catastrophizing. So blowing things way out of proportion. So everything is falling apart. I spilled coffee on my lap this morning. now my whole day is ruined. This day sucks. Again, it's important to understand why we catastrophize as well. Going back to this relationship between, the physical, emotional, and thoughts. If you wake up in the morning and you're hungry, if you didn't get a lot of sleep that night, you're more likely going to catastrophize if something bad happens for you. So again, if you spill your coffee when you wake up after not sleeping and you're hungry, you're more likely to think, shit, my whole day's ruined now. Um, Nothing's going to go right for me today. Today's a write off. And so if you can recognize in that moment, okay, I need to take a step back. I'm catastrophizing right now. Things aren't that bad. The reason why I'm having this response is because of the way that I'm feeling physically, and that pouring coffee in my lap's not ideal as well. That's going to give you a better sense to be able to kind of manage these things. So we also want to focus on strength building self statements for when we are, to help cope with difficult emotions. Um, so we think about strength building self statements. We're thinking about feelings that are sometimes painful, but are time limited. So that's a really important thing to remind yourself, is that, this depression or this anxiety that I'm feeling right now, it's extremely painful, it's difficult, but it's time limited. And something that prolongs these feelings is when we distract ourselves or when we push it under the rug. And that's why it is really important that we're engaging with our emotions on a regular basis. We're not just ignoring it. So, and in a way to be able to confront that is to recognize that it is time limited. So, although that it's really difficult to deal with right now and that it's painful, you don't want to rip it off with a band-aid in a sense. So, even though you're going to feel very anxious right now, maybe you want to watch some Netflix to help distract yourself from it. Try to resist that. Instead, rather engage with that anxiety and insecurity. Say, why am I feeling this right now? Where is this coming from? And then using this idea that it's time limited to help you kind of get through that as well. Another statement that's helpful is to let yourself know that it will get easier each time I practice as well. So the more that you can engage with your emotions, the more that you kind of bring in that logical understanding of your experience, the easier it is to be every time that you continue to engage in that emotional awareness, this experience of understanding, what you're feeling, why you're feeling this way, and what it's representing to you. And that's the thing, especially in this culture of toxic masculinity at times, I think a lot of men find it very difficult to engage with their emotions because of the discouraged to do so. And because it's difficult, they often, become very defensive or very aggressive at times as well. So, reminding yourself that it does become easier the more that you engage with your emotions, the more that you're able to kind of confront it, the more that you're able to sit with it, the easier it's going to be. Again, understanding that avoiding your emotions is going to make it harder. So if you get to a habit of engaging with it, it will become easier over time. The third strength building self statement is my success is measured by taking skillful action, not by what I was feeling when I did it. So again, what is meant by taking skillful action is taking the time to take that step back to understand what you're feeling, why you're feeling this way, and how you can best respond to this in a healthy way. So again, even if you're feeling really angry at somebody, even if you have a thought that you want to punch the wall, this skillful action is the process of taking that step back in that moment to say, okay, I'm feeling really angry. Um, I want to punch the wall, but now I realize, that's probably not a good idea. It's probably healthier for me to express myself to a friend, to my therapist, maybe, or write down how I'm feeling rather than hitting the wall. And then, providing yourself some self compassion there as well, to not give yourself guilt or shame for wanting to punch the wall. Because again, our feelings do cause some irrational behavior and thoughts, and you need to be able to provide yourself some self compassion with that. Some more kind of strength building self statements that we can use. Number 4, I'm still trying even though it's hard. And this is really important to kind of drive home, is that this emotional engagement is an ongoing process. It's a lifelong process as well. So unfortunately, we're not really taught in schools, in elementary schools, public schools, of how to deal and understand our emotions. So oftentimes as adults, we're just starting out to understand the value and the purpose in the context of our emotional experience. So again, it takes some effort there, even though it's going to be hard. And like the last slide said, it will get easier over time. So even though it's hard, it's difficult to confront our emotions, to sit with it at times. It's really important to do so, but validate that the idea that it is hard. It's gonna be very difficult at times. It's not easy to express these things. It's not easy to confront them, especially when we've developed habits to distract ourselves or developed habits to cope. especially through substance use. If you're used to, drinking or smoking cannabis to deal with your emotions, it's going to be much more difficult for you to engage with your emotional experience. So it's going to be much harder. So, remind yourself of that. That's part of the process. But again, going back to the last point, it does get easier over time. And that's really important to remind yourself. Another important point is asking for help is a skill in itself. So you don't need to deal with emotions alone. Again, we're not taught how to deal with them. We're ill-equipped often to kind of understand and engage with their emotional experience. So you certainly don't need to deal with this on your own. You're allowed to ask for help. I encourage you to ask for help because again, because our emotions can cause irrational thoughts and biases, uh, we often have a narrow sense of a narrow sense and understanding of our experience, quite a limited perception and kind of take on our experiences. So it's good to have that objective kind of understanding at times, whether that's coming from a therapist, mental health professional, or even just a friend. And by talking to these other people, that's going to be also very valuable in kind of building this capacity for positive self statements. So I want to talk to you about this concept of self distancing. So this idea that it's much easier to provide helpful and constructive feedback to somebody else opposed to offering it to ourselves. So, when a friend or family member is going through a hard time, we are able to pretty accessibly offer them some healthy kind of understandings, different ways of thinking about things. It's not as easy to be able to do that for ourselves, but the more that you ask for help and ask for that kind of feedback, the more that you'll be able to integrate that from what other people said into your own self-talk. So again, if you talk to your best friend every time that you feel anxious about your ability to write an assignment, and they tell you every time, no, you're actually great at assignments, even though you have anxiety, you always end up, pulling through and getting, an 80 on your assignments. You don't need to worry about that. Having that feedback will help inform that self-talk to say, even if that friend's unavailable, you can now say, okay, well, I'm feeling really insecure. My friend's unavailable, but I know if I did talk to them, this is what they would say. And I believe what they say. So again, asking for help is a skill in itself. It's helpful in itself to just be able to have the opportunity to express yourself, to have validation. Then as well, use what they say, those affirmations, that validation, to also inform your self-statements and that positive self-talk that helps us manage with these difficult emotions. Another really popular point is recognizing that our feelings aren't right or wrong. They simply just are. And this is often a challenge, especially when it comes to conflicts with other people, is people get really defensive when they feel like their emotions are invalidated as right or wrong. They say, what you're feeling is wrong right now. There's no way you can tell someone what they're feeling is wrong because they're feeling that. You might say, the reason why you're feeling that feeling is, misguided. Sure, that could be fair, but everybody is entitled to their feelings. You don't want to devalue, discount, or invalidate other people's feelings. So moving past this binary of right and wrong to more so feelings just are, and we need to move towards a mutual understanding of our feelings. That's going to be an important step forward to understanding, the process of emotional expression and whatnot. And this is helpful for yourself as well. Again, we have this tendency to really want to distract ourselves from our emotions, to push it under the rug, to kind of just get away from them because we feel like, what I'm feeling right now is wrong. I shouldn't feel angry for this. I shouldn't feel insecure about this. I know better than that. There's a reason why you feel that emotion, and it's really important to understand that. So this is something that I often talk to clients about as well, is, oftentimes we have an experience that informs our belief system, that creates things like insecurities and anxieties, and that creates unhelpful thoughts. And perhaps you're able to have a logical thought that contradicts that, but that doesn't negate that you're still feeling that anxiety. So even though you can recognize that, I shouldn't have this thought, the feeling, the reason why you have that thought is valid. It's happening for a reason. And with that, I encourage you to take a step back to understand, why am I having this feeling? If I feel like if it's wrong, then why is it there? Because it's happening for a reason. And then moving past the point that, it's not wrong, it's not right. I'm having it. It just is what it is. But it's good to know and take that step back to understand, why am I experiencing this? One last kind of point in terms of, the strength building to help build these self statements and to inform your positive self talk is to tell yourself, my emotions are happening for a reason and are an important source of information for me. Like I was just mentioning, There's a reason why we're having these emotions, and they can tell us something very valuable. So again, if something happened to you in the past and years ago that has, you know, perpetuated feelings of insecurity or anxiety, contempt, resentment, there's a reason why you're holding on to them. You haven't been able to find some kind of acceptance over that. Perhaps you haven't had the opportunity to process, to express yourself. So, you know, with that, recognizing that our emotions are valid, that they're there for a reason, listen to your emotions. Try to identify them and label them as accurately as possible, because again, they're an important source of information. And the more accurately we're able to understand and identify and label our emotions, the better we're able to kind of provide support for ourselves, the better and more equipped we're able to, you know, address and respond to them in healthier ways. So you really want to try and gather as much information around your emotion as possible. So again, encouraging you to confront your emotion, engage with it, try to bring in the logic to help you kind of have some clarity around assessing and evaluating your emotional experience, but then use that information to kind of say, you know, do I have unmet needs right now? What's the best way to meet those needs? So as I mentioned, you know, I was going to explain what emotions are, what the purpose is, some tools, and then I'm ending this workshop to kind of explore what supports are there available for you. Because again, you don't need to deal with this on your own. One of the skills is being able to ask for help when you need. So what are some ways that you're able to kind of have support and ask for help? Um, so counseling and peer support, really helpful. You have, as students, you have coverage to receive counseling and therapy. Take advantage of that. You're paying into it with your tuition. It's there for a reason. Again, we're living in very challenging times right now. It's now's the best time to reach and have that support. We're already dealing with those pre-existing challenges with our emotions. This pandemic is just heightening those challenges. It's adding additional stress. It's contributing to more difficult emotions. So feel free to reach out for support. Reaching out for support is not a weakness, it's a strength. It's admitting to yourself that, you know, I'm allowed to have support in this. I'm allowed to reach out. I'm allowed to, you know, have validation. It's part of that self-care. A lot of times we think about self-care as ordering a pizza and having a bath. Self-care needs to be thought about, you know, what are my needs and how can I best meet those needs? And that really requires some honesty with yourself. So if you feel like you have some unmet needs and you're having a difficult time meeting those needs on your own, you know, don't feel guilty or any shame or reluctant to reach out for counseling and support. With that, reach out to somebody that you trust. You don't have, if you don't feel comfortable talking to a mental health professional, talk to a friend that you can trust, that you can confide in, or reach out into a mentor, someone that you look up to, someone that might be able to provide you some guidance in terms of, you know, how you can manage these challenges that you might be dealing with. Use apps and digital programs. So there's a lot of resources out there. When it comes to apps, there's apps such as Headspace, Calm, Waking Up. These are meditation apps that not only offer you guided meditation and hold you accountable for the practice, but also give you other daily tips for helping, you know, you sleep, manage stress, making sure that you're being present in terms of engaging with your emotional experience. Try to attend more workshops. You know, you're here today, or maybe you're not here and you're watching this after it's recorded. Um, Hopefully you're getting something out of this. Look out for other workshops and other support groups in the community. There's lots available right now. All of it's virtual, which makes it even more accessible for you. Take advantage of that. Again, reaching out for these kinds of support, accessing the resources available to you are going to be helpful for you. And you really want to diversify the toolkit that you have. And maybe you've developed tools as an individual. You already have your own resources. But it's also good to continue to add to that toolbox, because there may be a time where those resources aren't working for you as well. And it's good to have those kinds of options. And one last way to support is to build upon your strengths. So identify, you know, what is working for you, what tools and resources do you have already, how can you use those to your advantage, how can you continue to sharpen and refine those tools that you have, and keep stocking an inventory on those. And in terms of, you know, what's most helpful in certain situations and whatnot. If you have any suggestions about other supports, feel free to put in the chat. I'm happy to hear additional suggestions. I'll share them with the group. You know, this is just a small list. You know, let me know what works for you. What are some of the tools and resources that you have? So feel free to put that in the chat, and I'll express what I see. Another resource developed by one of my colleagues is a self-care course that's offered through ShiftCollab, so through Real Campus, a program that's offered through UWaterloo. So go to go.realcampus.ca/rethink to have access to the self-care course. It was designed by our former clinical director, a wonderful therapist who focuses on self-care, self-compassion, and understanding the tools needed to kind of be able to manage some of these difficult emotions, these ongoing challenges. So again, take advantage of all the resources and tools available to you. And I want to remind you that you've got this and that we're here to help. So again, you have some tools available to you. Use what you have. If you don't feel like the tools that you have available to you are working for you right now, we're here to help you as well. So reach out to Real Campus, get in touch with a therapist, reach out to friends if you need to. Someone just said in the group chat that MATES is a peer support program through the Waterloo University Student Association that is running through the pandemic. Okay, so that is great. So I will send that to everybody. So that was in a private message. So here for everybody to know, MATES is a peer support program. So that's awesome. That's great to know. Again, if you don't want to speak one-on-one to a therapist, peer support programs are great. There's no expert there. It's everybody sharing their own experiences. And that peer support can be very validating. It offers a feeling of solidarity. And it can be a great opportunity to just express yourself, to hear others' challenges, and to get feedback of what's working for others. You can share what's working for you. Peer support groups are wonderful. So thank you for sharing that. That's awesome. Before we wrap up, I just want to check in. Does anybody have any questions, concerns? Anybody having difficulty understanding and managing emotions still? Was this workshop helpful? If so, why? If not, why not? I would love to hear that feedback. So I'll just leave the chat open just for a moment for you to provide any kind of feedback or to ask any questions or express any concerns that you might have. Okay, doesn't seem like anybody's writing anything in the chat. So I want to thank you for showing up today to this workshop. It was a pleasure to lead this workshop for you. I hope that you were able to get something out of it. Again, if you need any additional supports, please feel to reach out to these links below. So you can email us at victoriashiftcollab.com, Real Campus. I'll also put my email too. So my email is mitch@shiftcollab.com. If you want to speak to just someone general at ShiftCollab to get you in touch with Real Campus for the campus supports, you can email info@shiftcollab.com as well. So feel free to reach out. We're here to support you. And I hope you have a good rest of your day. Take care.